The Galactic medical station floated in the cold silence of space, a beacon of healing among the stars. Inside, Nurse Xyrala moved quickly between wounded soldiers, her emerald skin glowing faintly under the sterile white lights. She was a newly certified nurse from the planet Kirellian, assigned to the human ward after a devastating firefight between Earth forces and rogue mercenaries in the Eltaran Belt. Humans fascinated her. Their biology was strange, their tempers wild, and yet there was something undeniably compelling in their raw emotions and reckless bravery. Her newest patient had arrived, unconscious, dull, bruised, bleeding, and completely unfamiliar. His dog tag read, Sergeant Cole Wilder. She studied his face. Sharp angles, a faded scar over one brow. His chest moved steadily under the blanket life, but deeply hurt. She reviewed the chart and began a routine cleanse. It was standard protocol to clean wounds before further treatment, especially after field triage. She dampened the cloth and began her work, carefully wiping away dried blood and grime. As she worked lower down his muscular frame, her hand froze. Something was swelling between his legs. Rapidly, Xyrala's eyes widened in panic. She had read about human anatomy, but nothing had prepared her for this. Was it internal bleeding? An infection? A parasitic reaction? Doctor, she called, urgent but composed. The humans. Something is expanding rapidly. Dr. Silver-skinned Atari, with decades of experience, rushed over. He looked once, then burst into laughter. Oh, stars. Not again, he chuckled, waving a hand toward the other staff who peered in with smirks. It's a natural human response. Perfectly normal. You just stimulated him. Stimulated, Xyrala repeated, mortified. It's a sign of arousal, not illness. The doctor laughed again. Congratulations, nurse. It seems you've made quite the impression. Xyrala's cheeks turned a brilliant violet. She muttered an apology and returned to her work, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. But as she finished, her gaze lingered just a moment longer than it should have. This human, this welder, had already become something unexpected. Sergeant Cole Wilder stirred for the first time 3 days later. Xyrala had just finished checking his vitals when his eyes slowly opened, piercing blue, sharp even under the haze of medication. He blinked up at her, confused, dazed, and vulnerable. Where? AM1? He rasped. His voice cracked from disuse. You're in recovery, Xyrala answered, her tone calm despite the sudden race of her hearts. You were injured in combat. You're safe now. He blinked again, eyes settling on her features. Then I must be in some kind of paradise. Because you sure don't look like any doctor I've seen. Xyrala didn't know how to respond. Compliments were common among humans, she'd read. Flirtation often disguised discomfort. But the warmth behind his words made her pulse quicken. Before she could reply, Dr. Telron entered. Ah, Welder, welcome back. Gave us quite the scare. Nurse Xyrala here thought your condition was a death rattle. Welder raised an eyebrow. Condition? Xyrala's skin flushed violet again. Telron grinned and patted him on the shoulder. Never mind. You'll be back to your arrogant self in no time. As the doctor left, Welder looked at her with a mischievous glint. So, I was dying, huh? Did I do something? Dramatic you? Reacted to treatment. Unexpectedly, Xyrala muttered, trying to remain professional. Your biology is still a learning process. He smirked. Well, I'm glad to be your favorite science experiment. The next few days blurred into a quiet rhythm. Wilder recovered quickly, his resilience astounding even the senior physicians. Xyrala found herself signing up for extra shifts. She told herself it was for the experience, but she couldn't deny it. Something about this human drew her in. Late one evening, as she adjusted the sheets around him, his hand brushed hers. It was brief, accidental, but the contact sent a strange heat through her chest. Do Kirellians ever get close to their patients? He asked, his voice softer than usual. We are taught to remain neutral, she replied carefully. But, do you want to? The question lingered in the air longer than she expected. She didn't answer. As more of Wilder's personality emerged, Xyrala found herself laughing genuinely at his humor. He was reckless, irritatingly charming, and stubborn as a solar ox. But he was also kind, determined, and observant. He asked her about her homeworld, her studies, even her opinions on interspecies ethics. One afternoon, while she guided him through basic motor exercises, he winced mid-stretch. "Your shoulder's still stiff," she said, stepping behind him. She placed her hands on his back, adjusting his posture. "I don't think it's my shoulder," he said, and tilted his head toward her. "I think it's your hands, distracting me." Xyrala ignored the way her pulse fluttered. "Focus, Sergeant." "I am," he said with a grin. "Just not on therapy." She held her position, steady, professional, until she noticed how close they were standing. His breath grazed her cheek. His scent, wild and unfamiliar, clouded her senses. They didn't speak for a moment. Neither moved. "You have the most unusual eyes," he murmured, "like the sky just before it storms." "Sergeant," she warned, though her voice lacked conviction. "You can call me Cole." It was the first time he'd said it his name, not rank, not duty. She nodded. "Xyrala." He smiled. "Now we're even." Later that night, in the quiet of the nurse's lounge, Xyrala stared out the viewport at the distant stars. Her mind wandered to his smile, his voice, the way he looked at her like she was something more than just a nurse. She pressed her fingers to her lips, remembering the warmth of his breath. This was dangerous, illogical, against every code of conduct she'd trained under. But for the first time in her life, she didn't care. The recovery wing of the Galactic medical station ran on strict order, lights dimmed at the same hour every cycle. Check-ins logged with precision, and fraternization between staff and patients strictly forbidden. Xyrala had never questioned these rules. Until Cole Wilder. Every shift she volunteered for his care brought her closer to a line she didn't know she'd been approaching. At first, it was easy to pretend she was just being thorough. She reviewed his muscle scans, adjusted his recovery chart, and refined his therapy schedule with careful attention. But soon, it became harder to deny the anticipation she felt before seeing him, the way her thoughts wandered back to his laugh, his gaze, his voice saying her name. Cole didn't make things any easier. He met her professionalism with playful rebellion, always pushing the boundaries with sly comments and lingering touches. During one session, she guided him through balance exercises, her hands on his waist as he shifted his weight. He leaned into her just a little, enough that their bodies almost touched. "You know," he murmured, "I've had worse rehab experiences." She stepped back, heart racing. "Your progress is encouraging. So is your blush." Xyrala turned away, but couldn't stop the smile tugging at her lips. She hated how easily he disarmed her, how quickly he turned her composure to sand. But she also loved it. Every forbidden moment made her feel more alive than anything in her sterile, orderly life. That night, she wandered into the medical archives, a dim, quiet section rarely visited. She told herself she needed to study more about human anatomy, about post-trauma bonding behaviors. But as she browsed the database, her fingers paused on something different. Hidden in the side directory was a file not indexed under medical research. It was cultural, fictional, a collection of human stories, romance, longing, forbidden desires, written in passionate detail. She opened one out of curiosity and stayed there for hours. The more she read, the more she understood the human way of love, the hunger, the connection, the devotion that extended beyond logic. It wasn't just physical, it was intimate, messy, powerful. She recognized parts of herself in those pages, the need, the ache, the helplessness of falling into something you weren't meant to feel. When she next saw Cole, something had shifted between them. She didn't speak of what she'd read, but he noticed. He always did. During physical therapy, he reached for a resistance band and caught her hand by mistake. They didn't let go. His fingers curled around hers, warm and sure. "I've been thinking," he said softly. "We only get one shot at a lot of things. Life, love, the right person, at the wrong time. Then what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then you take the chance anyway." She pulled her hand back, trying to ignore the tremble in her chest. "We can't. It's unprofessional." He nodded. "Maybe, but it's also real." That night, she couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed his words, the touch of his hand, the heat in his eyes. She knew she was at a crossroads. Keep following the rules, or follow something deeper. Something more human than she'd ever allowed herself to feel. The next evening, she stayed after her shift. She told herself it was just to check on his condition one more time, but when she entered his room and found him sitting up, waiting for her, she knew it wasn't about vitals or charts. He patted the edge of the bed beside him. "You look tired," he said gently. "Want to sit for a bit?" She hesitated, then crossed the room and perched beside him, careful to keep space between them. For a few minutes, they sat in silence, listening to the hum of the station around them. "I shouldn't be here," she said finally. "But you are." He turned toward her, his hand brushing her arm. She didn't pull away. "You know," he said, his voice low. "They told me Kirellians don't get emotionally attached." "That's not true," she replied quietly. "We just hide it better." Cole leaned in slightly, his forehead resting gently against hers. "Then don't hide it from me." Xyrala closed her eyes. For once, she didn't think. She just felt. And then, with the stars watching through the viewport, she kissed him. The kiss was quiet, soft, but it shattered the walls Xyrala had built around herself since the day she arrived on the station. She had expected guilt to crash down on her immediately. Instead, all she felt was warmth. The soft press of Cole's lips, the hum of the ship around them, and the way time seemed to stop for that moment, as if the universe itself had decided to look away and give them privacy. When she finally pulled back, her heart was racing faster than ever. "That was," she began, unsure of how to finish the sentence. "Unexpected," he offered. She nodded. "And reckless, illogical, and completely worth it," Cole whispered, brushing his thumb over her cheek. "I've been waiting for you to see what's right in front of you." Xyrala stood abruptly. "I need to go." She turned and left without another word, her pulse pounding in her ears. The kiss had unlocked something inside her, and now she couldn't put it back. Every breath she took felt heavier. Every glance from him the next day seemed to linger, longer than before. When he smiled at her in the hallway, it was a silent reminder of what they'd shared and what they could never allow again. But the universe had other plans. That evening, the lights flickered in the medbay. A minor systems glitch. Nothing out of the ordinary, but it caused a brief lockdown of the patient quarters. Cole's door wouldn't open. Xyrala, having been caught on her way in, was trapped inside with him until the override reset. "Well," he said with a grin, "looks like fate is rooting for me." "This is temporary," she said firmly. 10 minutes at most. Cole sat back on the bed, stretching. "That's long enough to talk." She didn't sit beside him this time. She stayed near the door, arms folded tightly. "We shouldn't have kissed, but we did, and we can't again." He nodded slowly, no anger in his expression, only sadness. "I get it. You're afraid of what comes after." "I'm afraid of losing everything I worked for," she admitted. "My position, my future. You're a patient, Cole, and I'm your nurse. I won't always be." The words hung in the air between them. It was true. Soon, he would be discharged, reassigned, gone. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered, not looking at him, "but I can't stop thinking about you. Every time I try, I remember your laugh, or the way you look at me like I'm more than just a set of vitals to monitor. Cole stood and crossed the room in 2 steps. You are. She didn't resist when he took her hand. His touch was gentle, but there was strength behind it. I won't push you, he said softly, but I need you to know something. I've been through a lot. Battles, loss, pain. But nothing's ever shaken me like you. The way you cared. The way you see me. Not as a soldier, just as me. She looked up at him, searching his face. There was no manipulation in his eyes, no charm, just honesty. I'm scared, she confessed. So am I. He brought her hand to his chest, placing it over his heart. It beat steadily beneath her palm. But I'd rather be scared with you, he said, than safe without you. When the door unlocked, moments later, Xyrala didn't leave right away. She stayed just a little longer, just long enough to rest her head on his shoulder and close her eyes. She knew they were on the edge of something dangerous, but also something beautiful. They just had to be brave enough to step forward. Xyrala hadn't planned on returning to Cole's room after her shift. She told herself it was just a coincidence, just a final check before rest. But when the door slid open and she saw him sitting there, wide awake, she realized she'd wanted to see him all along. He looked tired, but calm. His shoulder was healing fast, and his color had returned. When he smiled at her, it wasn't flirtatious. It was something deeper, something honest. I was hoping you'd come back, he said, voice low. She stepped in and let the door close behind her. I shouldn't have, but you did. He stood, careful not to strain the healing muscles across his back. They were close again, closer than regulation allowed. Close enough that she could smell the warmth of his skin, something earthy and human. I read about your people, he said. Kirellians don't mate casually. We don't, she agreed. So what is this? He asked. Xyrala hesitated. She had no answers. Everything she'd believed about duty, discipline, and boundaries was unraveling. But even in her uncertainty, one thing had become clear. This wasn't temporary. I don't know what it is, she whispered, but I want to find out. He didn't say anything, he just pulled her gently into his arms. Her face pressed against his chest, and she felt the steady rhythm of his heart. She stayed like that for a long time. Their moments together became a secret language, a lingering touch when no one watched, a smuggled snack left at his bedside, a late-night whisper exchanged through a slightly opened door. It wasn't just desire anymore. It was something slower, warmer, more dangerous, and someone had started to notice. Dr. Narration, a senior administrator known for her icy discipline, paused one morning as Xyrala exited Cole's room. Her piercing eyes narrowed slightly, though she said nothing. But the next day, Cole's physical therapy schedule was reassigned to a different nurse. When Xyrala saw the change, her stomach dropped. She confronted the doctor directly. Why was my assignment altered? Dr. Narration didn't even glance up from her tablet. Reassignments are made regularly for rotation purposes. But I've been working with Sergeant Wilder since his arrival. He's comfortable with me, familiar. Which is precisely why the change was made, the doctor said, eyes finally lifting. Familiarity leads to complication. We must remain neutral, Xyrala said, nothing more, but she felt a cold weight settle in her chest. That evening, she slipped into Cole's room despite the risk. He sat up when he saw her, worry in his expression. They reassigned you. I know. They suspect something. I know that too. They sat in silence for a while, the space between them heavier than ever. I don't want to stop seeing you, he said quietly. We can't be reckless, she replied. If we push too far, too fast, they'll separate us permanently. They'll transfer you. Or worse. He clenched his jaw. So we lie. Pretend. Keep our distance when we must. Until what? Until I walk out of this place on my own 2 feet, he said. Then no one can tell us what we can or can't be. Xyrala's throat tightened. Hope wasn't a luxury in a galactic hospital, but Cole made her believe in it again. She reached for his hand. Then we wait, and when you leave this place, don't forget me. He grinned. That's impossible. And with that, they returned to their quiet game of hiding glances and trading touches and shadows. It wasn't easy. It was never going to be easy, but they had something real, something worth protecting, something worth fighting for. The following weeks crawled by under constant scrutiny. Cameras, reports, surprise inspections. Xyrala could feel the eyes on her everywhere she went. Her hands were steady, her face calm, but inside, everything trembled. Cole was progressing, faster than expected. He walked with more confidence now, lifting weights and doing resistance drills. Other nurses praised his determination. The head medic called it one of the fastest recoveries we've seen from a human soldier. But Xyrala knew the truth. He wasn't healing for himself. He was healing for them. Late one evening, as she walked past his room, pretending not to look, she found the door already cracked open. Cole stood in the shadows, his shirt damp from exercise, his breath shallow. "I miss you," he whispered. "And I don't just mean physically. I miss hearing your voice when it isn't just medical protocol." "I miss you too," she replied, softly. "But we have to be careful. Narration is watching us. She's just waiting for proof." "Then let's stop giving her any." She frowned, unsure. "What do you mean?" "I'm being discharged in a week." The words hit her like gravity. It had always been coming, but somehow, she had never let herself picture it. "I'll be transferred off station," he continued. "My orders are already in motion, and if I leave now, like this without saying what I need to say to you, I'll regret it." Xyrala stepped inside and shut the door gently behind her. Her heart beat louder than her thoughts. "You're not just a moment for me, Xyrala," he said. "You're not just a nurse or a memory of healing. You're the only reason this place felt like home." He moved closer, slow and careful, as if afraid she'd vanish. "I don't want to lose you." "You haven't," she whispered. She reached for him. Her fingers brushed the scar on his cheek, and she felt the tremor in his breath. When they kissed, it was no longer curious or hesitant. It was desperate and quiet and full of promises. They didn't speak for a long time. They just stood there, wrapped in silence and each other. The medbay lights outside flickered as another cycle passed, oblivious to the universe that had bloomed behind a locked door. When she finally pulled away, her voice trembled. "We can't do this again. Not here." "Then tell me where," he said. "Anywhere. I'll find a way." She smiled sadly. "You're reckless, and you love it." The next morning, the station administrator announced that a disciplinary investigation would begin against a member of the nursing staff suspected of breaking interprofessional boundaries. Xyrala heard her name whispered in corners. Cole saw his discharge orders moved up. They didn't speak in public again, but that night, tucked into a worn blanket beneath his cot, Xyrala found a note. Handwritten, human script. Rough and honest. "If this is the end of our time here, it won't be the end of us. I'll wait. You find me, see?" She folded the note and tucked it into the inside pocket of her uniform, next to her heartbeat. No matter what came next, she wasn't afraid anymore. She had someone waiting, and that meant everything. The day of Cole's discharge arrived with little ceremony. A silent march of protocol signatures, clearance codes, final scans. Xyrala stood across the medbay, her expression unreadable, her body locked in stillness. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry. Kirellians weren't supposed to show such emotion. Not in uniform, not in front of superiors. But everything in her ached to run to him. He didn't look back as he walked past the medics and out into the shuttle bay. That had been their agreement. No goodbyes. Not here. Not with the station's cameras blinking overhead and Narration lurking in every shadow. But he'd left something behind, just one word scratched into the inside of the doorframe to his recovery. room, soon. Xyrala stood there for a long time after he left, fingertips brushing the faded etching. No one else noticed it. No one else would have understood. Weeks passed, then months. She continued her rotations, returned to her assigned quarters, followed every rule to the letter. But something inside her had changed. Her curiosity, once clinical, now pulsed with fire. Every human patient became a window into the culture. She was falling in love with every book she read, whispered about freedom, defiance, and the ache of hearts that refused to be quiet. She kept Cole's note hidden inside her uniform at all times. Some days, it was the only thing that made her feel real, and then, one day, everything shifted. Her shift had just ended when she received a priority message, not through the station's standard channels, but delivered by hand, encrypted, marked for her eyes only. Inside, a short recording played. It was Cole, older now, a thin scar under one eye, but the same crooked grin. "Hey," he said, "I told you I'd wait." The screen flashed coordinates: deep space, just beyond the jurisdiction of the Galactic Medical Council, a neutral sector. No ranks, no uniforms. Just people. Her breath caught in her throat. He'd done it. He'd found a way. She filed for extended leave the next day. No one questioned it. Her record was spotless, her conduct perfect. But as she stepped off the station and onto the outbound transport, she didn't look back once. The ship was quiet, stars stretching endlessly across the windows. She watched them drift by, her hands clutching the tiny note, now worn from her fingertips. When the ship finally arrived at the neutral port, the docking doors slid open to reveal a modest outpost, and there, leaning against a rust-stained support beam, stood Cole, alive, whole, smiling. They didn't speak at first. They just stared at each other across the terminal as if to make sure it was all real. Then, she ran to him. He caught her in his arms, lifting her off the ground, burying his face in her shoulder. She smelled the faint soap she remembered, felt the warmth of his skin through his shirt, and heard the steady rhythm of the heartbeat that had once raced under her hands. "You came," he whispered, voice rough with emotion. "You waited," she replied. They kissed again, not as nurse and patient, not in secret, but as two people who had survived the rules, the distance, the doubts, and chosen each other anyway. They spent the next hours talking like old friends. No ranks, no regulations, just stories, laughter, touches that no longer needed to be hidden. He told her about the work he'd found training civilians on remote outposts. Nothing glamorous, but honest. She told him about the patients she still dreamed of, the books she read in secret, the languages she'd begun to learn just to understand him better. They built a life slowly, like rebuilding a ship from salvaged parts. Not perfect, but real. Their love didn't fade. It grew. With time, with honesty, with the freedom to speak without fear. They still laughed about the day she thought he was dying. The day his swelling nearly caused a medical emergency. That awkward moment became a private joke. One they whispered on rainy days or before bed, wrapped in each other's warmth. Eventually, they married, not in a ceremony sanctioned by any system, but under a sky of distant stars. No vows, just promises. No guests, just each other. And later that night, as they lay beneath the glow of unfamiliar constellations, Cole reached for her hand. "Do you remember," he asked, "when you told me Kirellians don't fall easily?" She nodded, head resting on his chest. "I'm glad I was the exception." She smiled. "You weren't the exception, Cole. You were the answer to a question I didn't know I was asking." And with that, they drifted to sleep, wrapped in a love that defied regulations, crossed galaxies, and endured everything the stars could throw at them. It all started with a misdiagnosis, but what she found in his arms was the cure.